Tonight's class is going to be on this week's Torah reading, Parsha Torah Unzipped. And there we go. Okay. So we're going to begin. What we're going to do tonight is basically there's 4 dimensions to Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, So, which means that there's 4 levels to the Torah. Each one is an increasing level in holiness. Complicated because I'm looking at the screen and my camera is not on the screen. We're using a different camera. And if we move further back, it's not going to work. It's okay. So we're going to take a few verses from this week's Torah reading, and we're going to analyze them in the order of. Let's move this a second. Okay. Okay, for those who are watching, let's start again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready. We're live on Facebook. Okay, we are now comfortable and set. So here's the deal. We are going to do a Torah Unzipped class, but it's going to only be on a few verses of this week's Torah reading. And the plan is to go level by level, deeper and deeper into the Torah reading to try and understand the deeper dimensions of the Torah that we're going to read this week, or that we would be reading this week. We know that the Torah is called an orchard, a pardes. The reason why it's called a pardes is because the Hebrew word for orchard, pardes, has 4 Hebrew letters, Pei, Resh, Dalet, Samach, and these 4 Hebrew letters are the first 4 letters of the word Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, which means Pshat is the simple dimension of the Torah reading. The Remez is the hints. The Drush is the messages, the lessons, and Sod is the Kabbalistic secrets of the Torah reading. So tonight we are going to study the Torah reading in a simple dimension, on a Remez, on the hint and on the allegory of the Torah, on the Drush, on the inspirational messages for us, and on the Sod, on the Kabbalistic dimensions of the Torah reading. So I'm going to begin. I see I have a few participants, thank God, Baruch Hashem, both on Zoom, on lifelongjewishlearning.com and on Facebook. And the reason why I'm doing the class this style is based on the feedback we got from the survey that was sent out. We got a lot of responses. Thank you to all those who responded. Of course, if you did not yet respond, you can go to lifelongjewishlearning.com, and there you'll be able to give your feedback on what you're looking forward to. Okay, so this is the opening of this week's Torah reading. Yomer Hashem el Moshe, and the Lord said to Moses, Emor el HaKohanim b'nei Aaron, speak to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron. Amarta aleim, and say to them, L'nefesh lo yutama be'amav, that let none of you defile himself for a dead person among his people. Here we have a command, black and white in the Torah, where God tells the priests that they should not only, this is for themselves, but they have an obligation to teach their children this as well. That's why it says that God spoke to the Kohanim, Emor el HaKohanim, speak to the Kohanim. The Amarta aleim, he says, speak to the Kohanim. And then it says again, and say to them. So since it says, speak to the Kohanim and say to them, because not only should you tell the Kohanim that they should protect themselves from become ritually impure by coming into contact with a corpse or any kind of dead body, we'll discuss that in a minute, but they have an obligation to make sure that their children also live by those same standards as well. Nefesh lo yitama be'amav, let no person become impure, a soul of his nation. That's better. Ki, except verse 2, Ki im l'she'ero, except for his relative who is close to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and his brother. Verse 3, for the virgin sister who is close to him who is not with a man, for her he shall defile himself. Here we see a list of relatives for which a Kohen, a priest, is allowed to become ritually impure. Who is the list? So it says his mother, his father, that's 2, his son is 3, his daughter is 4, his brother is 5, his virgin sister who is close to him, meaning she's an unmarried sister. For all those people, he is allowed to become ritually impure. Who is the first one on the list? It says here, except for the relative who is close to him. Who is the relative that's considered close to the Kohen, for which the Kohen is allowed to become ritually impure, in addition to his mother, his father, his brother, his unmarried sister, his son, and his daughter? The rabbis tell us that the relative who is close to him, this is, anyone want to comment? Anyone know? The one who is close to him is his wife. Meaning a Kohen is allowed to become ritually impure for his wife. If God forbid his wife passes away, he may become ritually impure for him. However, but a husband, verse 4, shall not defile himself for a wife who is not permitted to him, etc. They're talking about not making bald patches on their head, nor shall they shave the edge of their beard, nor shall they make any cuts in their flesh. They shall be holy to God, and they shall not desecrate God's name, for they are the ones who offer up the fire offerings of the Lord. They are the ones who bring the food offering of their God before Hashem on the Mizbeach, and therefore they shall be holy. They shall not allow themselves to become ritually impure by coming into contact with a dead body or that is the verses that we are going to discuss today. So here we have black and white, the commandment of a priest not to become ritually impure, any single person, with the exception of his mother, his daughter, his father, his wife, his sister. So let's first discuss this on the pshat level, on the basic level of understanding what the Torah says, and then we'll go into deeper dimensions. Even to today, I'm on the phone, I'm on the couch. Okay. Okay. Good night, Menucha. Say good night. I'm on the class, Menucha. So, close the door. Thank you. The joys of teaching at home. So, we know, even till today, that although many, in fact, most of the laws of ritual impurity do not apply to a Kohen today, because the Kohen today, they don't eat the holy food of the priest, they eat regular food like the rest of us. Nevertheless, one of the main differences today in Jewish law between the Kohen and the rest of the Jewish people is in their ability to come into contact with the dead body, which is primarily relevant when they go to a cemetery for a funeral, visiting the grave of a relative, etc. So let's just go briefly, I don't want to get the whole halacha class tonight, but just go over a few of the basic ideas to understand the pshat, the simple dimension of the verses we just read. Because a Kohen is holy to God, and the Kohen has to always be ready to serve in the temple, and even though today we don't have a temple and we don't have the priests that are bringing the offering and the food before God, but we believe with emunah shlema, with complete and absolute faith, that at any single moment God could come, and God could, this second, bring Mashiach. Therefore, we have to be ready. And therefore, if a priest would become ritually impure, they would have to purify themselves, and they wouldn't be able to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to go into a room where he's not allowed to touch a corpse, obviously. He's not allowed to be within 4 cubits, which is approximately 6 feet, of a dead body, nor is he allowed to be under the same roof as a dead body, in the same ohel, in the same tent. Therefore, a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to go into a chapel where there's a funeral service being done, because he's under the same roof. Even if he's standing more than 6 feet away from the actual coffin, he is still under the roof, and therefore he becomes ritually impure by being under the same roof as the corpse. Obviously, this becomes quite difficult for a rabbi who is a Kohen. My uncle Ray Friedman is a Kohen, and obviously there's many rabbis that are priests, and there's many logistical issues they have as far as officiating at funerals. A rabbi who is a Kohen, or for that matter, any Kohen, is not allowed to attend the chapel service of a funeral. They are allowed. Hello, everyone that's watching, and thank you for all the blessings. Hello, Susie and Mitch and Bruce. Hello. A Kohen is allowed to attend a funeral if need be, but he has to be very careful not to come within 6 feet of a dead body or of a grave, of a marker, nor can he stand under a tree that is also covering a grave. So that's why, in general, priests try to have plots that are near the end of a road to make it easier, at the end of a row, to make it easier for their family to come and visit them. But if there's a tree that is, let's just say, here's the grave, and the tree is here and is going here. So if you're the priest is standing here, he's still under the same tent. It's not okay. But a rabbi that's a priest could do a service as they're standing on the road, far away from the graves, and there's no trees that are overhead, then he would be okay. Obviously, he wouldn't be allowed to actually dig the dirt, etc. An issue where this comes up is that the roof over a dead body could be slightly larger than you think. Where this may be a very big halachic issue that some of you might not realize watching tonight is for a Kohen to go into a hospital. A hospital almost certainly has a dead body inside the hospital. First of all, most hospitals have a morgue where they store bodies. I mean, most hospitals have people that die in hospitals. Hospitals are not a safe place, even before coronavirus. So being in the same building as a dead person is very problematic. Obviously, if a Kohen needs medical care, you're allowed to go into a hospital to get any kind of medical care that a Kohen needs, or to take care of a family that needs medical care. Even if not for a Kohen to go and visit someone else in the hospital, it's a very delicate issue, and it depends on the circumstances, depends on what floor the morgue is, if there's a floor in between, if the hallway will go the same way where they would take the body, etc. So there's different leniencies that would allow a Kohen to go into a hospital where there might very possibly be a dead person in the same building, as long as they're obviously not in the same room, obviously, or in the same vicinity. Another area, even more remote, I'm sure that almost none of you will have thought about that will be problematic for a Kohen to go into, would be a museum. A museum very often may have bones, not all very often. If the museum has bones of a mummy, of an Egyptian mummified mummy, or of some other dead person, a Kohen would not be allowed to go into that museum. Now, these laws of Tuma, of the ritual impurity, only apply for a human being. According to the majority of rabbinic authorities, this would also apply for a non-Jew. The body of any human being would impart the same ritual impurity. That's generally speaking. However, an animal, let's say a dinosaur, would not impart that ritual impurity, and a Kohen could go to a museum that has real dinosaur bones, which, by the way, many museums probably don't have real dinosaur bones. It's probably just a model that was built to kind of a replica. Anyway, that's some of the halachic implications of a Kohen not coming into contact with a dead body, not going into the chapel service, not standing under a tree together with a coffin, etc. With the exception being the ones we just mentioned in the verse: the father, the mother, the brother, the sister, the wife, the unmarried sister, I should say, and the son and daughter. Okay, that's what we call pshat. That is the simple dimension of the verse. Now, I want to take you, my dear friends, I want to take you a step further, and I want to go into the remez. Remez means the hints. Good evening to all those who are watching. Remez means the hints. What deeper message, what implication, what halachic significance can we find that's not written explicitly in the Torah, but from the words that are used or the words that are not used in the Torah, we can learn messages that have real halachic day-to-day implications. So I'm going to go back to the same verse, and again, I hope I'm not going too fast. Let's look at that same verse again, and let's see what message can we see hinted in the Torah. So obviously that a Kohen can't become ritually impure. That's black and white in the Torah. You don't need any rabbinic knowledge. You open up the Bible black and white, and you see that it says that a priest, it says right over here, that a priest is not allowed to defile himself or any dead person except for the relatives who are close to him, his mother, his father, etc. What's unique here is that the Torah does not say that you are allowed to defile yourself for your wife. It does say that, but it says it in a little bit of a hinting way. What the Torah says in verse number 2 is that a Kohen is not allowed to become impure except for his relative who is close to him. Or in the Hebrew, for those who read Hebrew, ki im lishe'ero hakarov elav. Except to that who is lishe'ero, his relative, hakarov elav, who is close to him. And then the Torah mentions li'imo, to his mother, or la'aviv, to his father, etc. So why would the Torah not just say li'ishto, to his wife? One word, his wife, and that would tell us that a Kohen is allowed to become ritually impure for his married wife. So there is a remnant, there are laws, and there are ideas that are being hinted to us in the Torah by the exact choice of words the Torah uses. Says the Torah, says the rabbis in the Gemara, that from the fact that it says, from the fact that it says, L'she'ero, his relative, Hakarov, who is close to him, this tells us that the only wife for which he is allowed to become ritually impure is a woman that's already married, who's already close to him. But if they were only engaged, she was his fiance, but they had not yet actually consummated their marriage and actually been together in intimacy in a way that actually begins the marriage, then there's no marriage. There's no marriage. She's not close to him. The Kohen would not be allowed to become ritually impure to her. The next word says, a love, who is close, in English, to him. What does to him mean? That this wife is someone who is still connected to him. From here we learn a halacha that if it's his ex-wife, she is no longer his, she's become divorced. So even if he still feels very sad that she passed away and he still feels feelings for her and he feels about his kids, etc., she is no longer a love. She is no longer to him, and therefore he no longer become ritually impure. That's an example. So the verse that I chose to discuss tonight, it's very beautiful to see how the exact words that the Torah uses are words that teach us messages that have real implications in Jewish law, hinted from the words the Torah used. So again, to be clear, a relative who is close to him means his wife, but it has to be a wife that's actually karov, who's actually close, meaning she's actually already married and intimate with him, and it has to be a wife that is to him, meaning a wife that he is still married to, not one that he has since divorced. Okay. Just to explain verse number 3, for his virgin sister, obviously once she's become married, now it's no longer the responsibility of the brother. She is now under the husband will take care of her, and the children and the family of this new woman will take care of her. Okay. Now, I hope we're clear. Now let's go to a drush, a homiletical explanation. Again, I think I rushed from the beginning, but there's different, like an onion, you peel away the layers of the fruit and you go deeper and deeper and you find more and more meaning. So we're taking this one verse, and this perhaps may be the new style of our Monday night Torah Unzipped class. I would love to hear your feedback on it. And you let me know if you enjoy this style, if you think this is the way we should continue. To take one verse or one chapter, one concept in the Torah reading, and to discuss it on different dimensions and different levels. So let's go to a deeper dimension of the Torah called the drush. Drush in English is translated as homiletical explanations. Many of you probably don't even know what the word homiletical means. Um, I don't. I mean, I do, but I know from the Hebrew, not from the English. The way I understand, the way I explain verse means blessings. That's the easy, the proper, not only proper, but the practical translation. What is the message? Besides for the hint of the words, what is the message that me and you can take from this verse? So again, I'm going to focus on the fact that when it's describing how a Kohen is allowed to become ritually impure for his wife, the Torah does not explicitly say the word his wife. Rather, it says to a relative who is close to him. The Hebrew word is lishe'ero, the wife that is close to him. I'm going to teach you a Kli Yakar. Kli Yakar gives a beautiful explanation, and it's based on this statement in the Talmud. So let's read the Talmud together in the English. This website called Safari, by the way, is a fascinating, excellent website. It's a great resource to have. Anyway, this is a Gemara in Yevamos. Let's read it together and let's discuss it. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Yossi encountered Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. And Rabbi Yossi asks Elijah the prophet a question. He said to him, it is written regarding when God made Eve, Chava, but God said, I will make Chava to be an Ezer Kenegdo, to be a helpmate for him. And earlier in the Gemara was talking about the idea of an Ezer Kenegdo and how the woman could either be a help if the man merits. Like I merited, my wife is an Ezer, she's a tremendous helper and asset and strength. And if a man does not merit, she's Kenegdo, she's a opposer and an adversary. That's the Gemara right before, very famous Gemara. But then the Gemara continues with this question. Rabbi Yossi asks Elijah the prophet, in what man does a woman help a man? So Elijah says to Rabbi Yossi, when a man brings wheat from the field, does he chew raw wheat? When he brings home flax, does he wear unprocessed flax? Obviously not. Man in ancient days was a farmer. He was the hunter. He would bring home a dead animal. He went and caught an animal. He'd bring home the wheat he grew in the field or the flax that he made, but he doesn't eat raw wheat. His wife turns the raw products into bread and clothing. Is his wife not found to be the one who is Ma'orei Nayim, who lights up his eyes and stands him on his feet? Okay, that is the Gemara. And then it says, this is what is written, that the woman becomes like the bones of my bones, and the flesh of my flesh, etc. Well, that's not really what we need. Okay, fine. That's the Gemara. So let us discuss this Gemara for a second regarding what a wife does for a man. And let us then see how this helps us in our understanding of the verse and why it does not call him a wife. Call her, sorry, a wife. So the Kli Yakar says, and now we understand why it is that this priest, who's supposed to be so ritually pure, is allowed to defile himself and make himself impure for the woman that feeds him. Because she is the one that takes the sweet and makes the sweet his flesh. You have bread, you have wheat, which became bread. My wife makes an amazing challah, as many of you might have had last Friday. Now you'll get this week. And whoopsies, why are we sharing? Mistake. Is what, and so she makes this amazing challah. Who makes the food become his flesh, become it digested and internalized within him? It's the wife. And therefore, because it's the wife who makes the flesh become, the food become his flesh, therefore, even though she was not created as bones of his bones, meaning the mother, the father, the daughter, the son, even the unmarried sister, they are all related to the Kohen. So the reason why the Kohen is allowed to become ritually impure for his daughter or son is because they are part of his flesh. They're part of him. So of course he's allowed to become ritually impure to them. However, this woman was not a part of him. She was from a different family. She was from a different flesh than his flesh. But yet, because the woman has the ability to transform this food that he ate to now become part of him, and he became close to him. Therefore, he's allowed to become ritually impure for her because of what he done for her. However, here comes the message for us. You might think that any person that fed me, I should be allowed to become ritually impure for them. I hire a chef, or I go to a restaurant, and the person in the restaurant makes me delicious dinner, delicious steak. They made food become part of my flesh. Therefore, the Torah uses the word l'she'ero. L'she'ero implies she'er avichahi, meaning that she is a part of him. She becomes now united and bonded with him through their having children, etc., but they become bonded together as well. So there's a drush, there's a message for us here. A woman, a wife, is not just a relative. She's not just a part of you because she was born together with you, etc. A woman is the person who became you through her actions. She was able to transform wheat. She was able to transform flesh that sat on top of your flesh, or the bread which was inside you became part of your bones, to become one with you. And therefore, because she became one with you, and she was intimate with you in intimacy and marriage to create children as well, all things that she does, therefore she achieves a level of closeness even greater than the closeness you have with those who are naturally your natural biological relatives, etc. It's a beautiful message for us. It's a beautiful message for us, especially sometimes I think our wives for granted, is that the connection of a husband and a wife is actually in some ways more powerful than any other relationship because of the bond that the wife is able to create with her husband. I'm reminded of a story, and I'm saying this, reminded of a story of a man. He was 90 years old, and he went to the doctor one day. He had some medical issue. He had to go get whatever it was, some kind of medical procedure. And he's in the doctor's office, and it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, whatever time it is. And as you can imagine, this is before the days of telemedicine. And you can sit in the doctor's office for 2 hours, and you can wait for the doctor to come in and this, and they have to put in the drops, and you have to wait for it, etc. You can be in the doctor's office for a few hours. So he starts telling the nurse, he finally is waiting in the waiting room for a long, long time, 2 hours, whatever it is, it's ready now, it's after 11. And he says to the nurse, tell me how much longer will it be? I need to go have lunch with my wife. So the nurse knows that he's not going anywhere so fast. He's got at least another hour, hour and a half. Doctor's not even available yet. He has to wait for whatever it is. She just started, like to take the medicine, the fever, and went away. So she says, it's going to take a while. Do you think your wife will get nervous? Do you go to, she starts talking to you, go to your wife every day, whatever. So she says, every single day, I go have lunch with my wife. She says, where's your wife? She's in some assisted living facility, wherever it was. And every single day, without fail, at 11 o'clock or whatever time it is, I go, at 12 o'clock, I go have lunch together with my wife. You have to go outside. Can you take him? Want to say hi to everyone?
Yeah.
Say bye. Okay.
Say hi. Hi.
Okay, bye. So he, every single day I have lunch with my wife. I never miss it. So the nurse is feeling bad. I said, will your wife get worried if you're going to be late? So he says, no, my wife actually will not even know if I'm there or not. He says, your wife won't even know? He says, no, my wife has dementia. And my wife, sadly, her dementia has gotten worse and worse. And it's reached a point now where she does not recognize anybody. And my wife does not recognize me. I'm going to go, she's never going to recognize me. She won't know who I am. So now the nurse says, so if she won't even recognize you, so why are you so worried? She won't even recognize you. She won't even know that you're not there. So he says, this old man of 90 years old says to the young nurse, my wife may no longer recognize me, but I still recognize her. My wife may not recognize me, but I recognize her. Understand? Very, very powerful message for us. So the wife is not just a wife. She's not just the wifey or the relative. She is the one that became close to him. Through her talents, through her gifts, through her hard work, she became close to him in a very unique and special way that makes her even closer than the rest of the relatives that are mentioned after her in the verse. Okay. That is a drush, a message for us about the closeness of a husband and wife from the fact that the Torah doesn't just say a wife, but it writes how she is a relative, hakarov, a love that is close to him, bringing out the closeness of husband and wife. Now, let's go a step even deeper, and let's get a little Kabbalistic and get to the secret, deeper, inner dimension of this verse and this story. On this verse, but of a Kohen becoming ritually impure for his family. And again, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to learn another statement in the Talmud. This time, we're going to learn a statement in the Talmud from the tractate of Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin, page 39a, Lamed Tes Amud. Okay, says the Gemara, a certain heretic said to Rabbi Abahu, your God is a priest. Your God is a priest. How to know that your God is a priest? As it says in the verse, I don't know what just happened over here. How do we get rid of this? One second. Oh, I don't know how to do that. Okay. Your God is a priest. Why? Oh, there we go. There we go. So your God is a priest. As it is written, they take for me an offering, a truma, and the truma, the offerings are only given to priests. So since God conducts himself like a Kohen, like a priest, and that he eats the truma, so this heretic asked Rabbi Abahu sarcastically, when God buried Moses, because we know that God is the one that buried Moses. Moses was not buried. If you know the story, it says in the Torah that no man was involved in the burial of of Moses. God himself was the one that buried Moses. So if God buried Moses, what does that mean? That God himself became ritually impure. But we just learned the law that a Kohen is not allowed to become ritually impure. So he asks, the heretic asks, when he buried Moses, in what mikvah did God immerse? We know that a priest who goes ritually impure has to go to the mikvah in order to eat truma again. And if you would say, right here, and if you would say that God immersed himself in the mikvah, but you can't say that, why not? Because isn't it written who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, meaning that all the waters of the world fit into the palm of God, so he could not immerse in them, right? God couldn't immerse in the water because in order to be a kosher mikvah, the mikvah has to be big enough for the person to immerse himself inside the mikvah. But it says all the water of the world will fit into the palm of God's hand. So if all the water fits into God's hand, metaphorically speaking, obviously, so then obviously God can't go to the mikvah. So how did God purify himself? Rabbi Abahu said to him, he immersed in fire. As it is written, for behold, the Lord will come in fire. Says the heretic to Rabbi Abahu, but is immersion in fire effective? From where do you learn that a mikvah could be fire? Normally a mikvah is water. Rabbi Abahu said to him, on the contrary, not only is fire effective to purify something, but actually fire is really a more powerful, a more effective purifying agent than water. How do you know that? The main form of immersion is in water, is in fire, as it is written regarding koshering a vessel. When you want to remove a non-kosher flavor from a vessel, it says, and all that abides not in fire should go to the water. Meaning that if something is absorbs flavor through fire, water will not absolve it, indicating that fire purifies more than water does, right? In order to purify, I don't know what does that, but in order to kosher a vessel, water is not enough. If the vessel became impure through fire, you need fire to remove it. So here we see that the power of purifying with fire is more powerful than water, and therefore Rabbi Abba says to his heretic, you want to know Rabbi Abba, how God became ritually purified, so to say, metaphorically speaking, after he himself was the one who buried Moses through fire. Now you, my smart people, my smart friends that are watching tonight, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept that whatever God does, whatever God tells us to do, God himself does. As we know, it says, Magid Devarav Liyakov, Chukav Mishpadav Lisol. Whatever God tells us to do, it's his word, it's his statutes, it's his laws, meaning he himself lives by the same commandments that he gives us. The obvious question then is, how could God become ritually impure in the first place? Meaning, God is a Kohen, and a Kohen is not allowed to become ritually impure to someone that's not his family. So, how could God become ritually impure to Moses? Now, I see someone ask the question on Facebook, a very good question. How could anything make Hashem impure? Right? God is the ultimate of purity. How could you say something de-purified God? That is an excellent question. Very good question. And let us address this, and you will see the answer. Will automatically answer your question, Mindy, as well. You'll see the answer. It's a good question. Let's understand the question. Actually, no, let's understand this question. Whatever God tells us to do, God himself does. So if God conducts himself like a Kohen, and God says, I want to eat the food of the offerings, the truma, like the priests do, then God needs to keep the same standards that he tells us to keep. God is not like a politician. Many politicians said social distancing, right? Don't go out of your home unless it's for essential purposes, only wear masks, etc. And then whether it's Mayor de Blasio walking in the park, whether it's the vice president, we see many politicians on both sides. This is not any political party. It's power, and you see so many, not only in here, you see in Switzerland, the president, not the president, I forgot who it was already, I think it was in Switzerland. Also, the president, broke the rules. So God is not like that. God does not say that you have to stay far away from a dead body, but I can come into contact with a dead body. It doesn't work that way. God follows his rules. So how could God be involved in the burial of a Kohen, of Moses? So what may be the answer? Let's see if someone is smart and tells me. When God was burying Moshe, Moshe is like his family. Moshe is like his child. Moshe is like his wife, his son. Is a priest allowed to become ritually impure for his son? Yeah. So how did God become ritually impure by burying Moshe? Because Moshe is his child. A priest can become ritually impure for a child. So far, so good. Let's use the Gemara logic more. But what kind of priest is allowed to become ritually impure for their child? Only a regular priest. We didn't read it in the text, but if I was to show you the text, you would see a few verses later that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is not even allowed to become ritually impure for his wife, for his father, for his mother, for his son, for his daughter, for his brother, or for his unmarried sister. A Kohen Gadol has even higher standard of purity, and a Kohen Gadol is never allowed to become ritually impure. With the exception, by the way, of a mes mitzvah. A mes mitzvah is someone who dies, but there's nobody to take care of their burial. They died and they had no family. No one knows who they are. They were poor. They were, a traveler. So this person has no family to take care of their burial. Is an obligation on every single Jew that comes in contact with this person to busy themselves with giving him a burial right away, including the Kohen Gadol. So the Kohen Gadol was walking down the road, and he sees a dead body, a dead Jew lying on the side of the road. Even though he could go and call somebody else to go and make sure this person receives a proper kosher burial, in order not to delay and not to leave this dead person lying in a disrespectful manner, abandoned on the side of the road while the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, goes to find somebody else to bury this person, the Kohen Gadol, who is not allowed to become ritually impure for his own child's funeral, is allowed to become ritually impure to help bury this poor person. There's nobody else to bury. That's an amazing lesson in and of itself. It highlights very clearly the importance that Judaism gives to a proper kosher burial, and the importance that Judaism gives to kavod hames, to the respect that we have to give to a deceased person, to the body, to the corpse of a person that passed away, not to turn them into some sightseeing attraction. They should be covered and they should be treated with respect, and not to delay their funeral, to make sure they're buried as soon as possible. The Kohen Gadol was not allowed to leave his body lying abandoned on the side of the road and delay the funeral till someone else would come. He himself, the holiest man of the Jewish people, had to ritually defile themselves to make sure that this person had a proper kosher burial. That's a side note. Going back to what we were saying, if God is only a regular Kohen, if God's only a regular standard, typical priest, then yeah. So a regular priest is allowed to become ritually impure during the death or during the funeral of their child. And so too, God is allowed to become ritually impure for the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, and for the funeral and the burial of Moshe Rabbeinu. But if God is a Kohen Gadol, God is a high priest, how is he allowed to become ritually impure? To be involved personally in the burial of Moses. By the way, I jumped a little bit ahead of myself because I'm so excited to get to this, and I don't have good notes tonight because I was learning and I was, working on the backdrop. I hope to get the backdrop. But the same thing is true regarding all of the Jewish people, by the way. All the Jewish people are called the wife of Moses. It says regarding the prophet Isaiah, it describes that when the Jews went into Galus, so it says in the verse in Isaiah that you say, who is this coming from Edom with soured and reddened clothes? With soured and reddened clothes, says God, I have become garments and become red and soiled because I was involved in my children. How is God allowed to become ritually impure for us when we were exiled from our land? As that God's clothing became defiled and dirty for us. It says the Zohar that in Kabbalah it says that a Kohen cannot contaminate themselves, and the Jews were ritually impure, so how did God come in contact with us? It says the Zohar that the children of Israel are considered like God's virgin sister who has never been married. A person, if a Kohen has a sister who has never been married, then the priest is allowed to become ritually impure to be involved in the burial. The Jewish people are like this sister of God that was never married to another man, meaning we were never married to another idol. We were maybe banished from God's house, and we had a little bit of a falling out with God, and we may be separated for a few thousand years while we were put into exile. But at the end of the day, the Jewish people have never become remarried to anybody else. We're still an unmarried virgin sister. And therefore, says Kabbalah, says the Zohar, God is allowed to contaminate himself for us, the Jewish people. But the same question asks the Rebbe on what the Gemara says, is the same question on the Zohar. If God is only a regular Kohen, a regular priest, then yeah, I understand that God is allowed to become ritually impure for the Jews who are like an unmarried sister. But if God is a Kohen Gadol, if God is the holiest of all the priests, if God's on the highest stature, the highest level of holiness, then, and which makes sense, there's no greater holiness than the level of God. So how could God metaphorically contaminate himself and become ritually impure for the Jewish people, even if we are like a unmarried sister or like a child, etc.? I hope that the question is clear. Again, I don't have the feedback that I'm used to in a regular class. I'm hoping that I've been able to communicate effectively this question. If not, let me just very, very briefly review it, make sure I'm clear. I don't want anyone to miss it. The Talmud that we quoted, we're now on the deepest level. We're on the Kabbalistic secret dimension of the verses describing how a Kohen is allowed to become ritually impure for his immediate relatives, the ones that we said Shiva for, a father, mother, brother, unmarried sister, son, daughter, and a wife. Question is, so the heretic asks, how did God become ritually impure to bury Moses? Similar to the question that the Zohar asks on the verse in Isaiah. How did God become contaminated for the Jewish people when we were exiled from our land? And the answer is that the Jews are like God's unmarried sister. Moses is like God's child. So he's allowed to become defiled for us. That answer only works. What we said in the Torah today, that a Kohen can become impure for his family, is a regular Kohen. But a high priest, a Kohen God, can't. So how can we say that God is allowed to become ritually impure? So we have to understand, what does it mean when we say that God is like something? What does it mean when we say that God can become ritually impure? For that matter, what does it mean when we say that God is like a Kohen? Or God is like a Kohen God? We're using borrowed terms, meaning the human brain can't understand esoteric ethereal concepts. In order for us to understand godliness, we use concepts and words that the brain can understand in order that the human can understand them. But really, these are only metaphors. They're not actually describing God himself. They're describing ways that God brings himself into our understanding, meaning the ways that God interacts with us. The best example of this is the 10 Sefirot. We know now we're in the time of Sfirat Omer, the counting of the Omer, which is 49 days, which are really the 7 emotions of God, multiplied by 7. So the emotion of Chesed has Chesed of Chesed, Gvura of Chesed, etc. What does it mean that God has emotions? God has kindness. God has emotions. He has like a good day and a bad day. Now, obviously, yes, there's verses in the Torah that describe the kindness of God. And there are verses in the Torah that describe the anger of God. And there are verses in the Torah that describe the compassion and the mercy of God. But even though there's verses that describe the compassion of God, does not mean that God has kindness or compassion or anger in the way that us human beings understand these concepts. They're metaphors that in order for us to understand God's interacting or engagement with the world in different modes of relationship, in different modes of engagement, we use human terms to help our human brains understand these spiritual concepts. Just like when we say in the Torah that God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. Or we say that it's the Yad Chazaka, the mighty hand, the powerful hand of God. Does God have a hand? Does God have an eye? It says that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. Does God see us with eyes? God absolutely does not have eyes in the way that me and you have eyes that see. So just like when we say that God's eye, that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears, and that God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm, in no way whatsoever do we mean that God had an actual arm that came and like picked us up and took us out of Egypt. Absolutely not. We understand that it's metaphorically, that in order for us to understand God taking us out of Egypt, we use the word arm and hand to help the human brain understand. The exact same thing is true in the other emotion. We say that God has kindness. We don't mean kindness in the way that me and you have kindness. We're using a human term to explain a concept that we have no other way of imagining. As I'm saying, I'm thinking of the joke of I don't remember offhand. Thinking what my brain's in this. Anyway, so when we talk about spiritual concepts that God has, we're actually just using borrowed terms in order that we should understand them. Okay? The real joke, the good joke, I don't remember offhand who was. But a weaker version is that the kid didn't understand how Noah had 3 sons. The teacher trying to explain the verse that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. So the teacher says to the kid, your neighbors are Goldsteins. You know them? So the kid says, of course. So how many kids do they have? The Goldsteins have 3 boys. And what are the boys' names? Chaim, Beryl, and Shmerel. So the teacher says, good. So too there's a man called Noach, and he had 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafet. Okay? And then the kid comes home from school, and the mother said, what did you learn today? He said, I learned that Noach has 3 sons. The mother says, great, what are the 3 sons' names? Chaim, Beryl, and Ishmael. He took the analogy of a goldfish has 3 boys, and instead of realizing that it's just an analogy up to a certain point and then retranslating it back to God, to the analogy, to the nimshal, to the allegory, he got too carried away and said, Noach's kids are these Chaim, Beryl, Ishmael. So too, when we're told that we are created in the image of God, what that means is that God made us with ideas that we can understand with his energy, the way he relates to us with the words that we can understand. So let's go back to the idea of a Kohen Gadol, the Kohen. When we talk about God being compared to a Kohen, what is a Kohen? Obviously, God is not a Kohen. But what is the analogy? What is the borrowed term that we can understand, and what do we learn from about God's relationship with us from us calling God a priest? What is a Kohen? A Kohen is somebody who has been divinely ordained, not because they earned it, and been imparted with a greater measure of holiness than his more mundane, fellow beings and the other Jews. And therefore, the time to the temple, a Kohen was someone whose life was devoid of business and of owning land and of farming and plowing, etc. The Kohen was a man of God. He served at the temple. He was the conduit when the person wanted to bring a Thanksgiving offering or a sin offering and become closer to Hashem. The Kohen was the one that was the conduit to bring this man closer to God. Therefore, obviously, the Kohen had to be removed from physicality, which is why the Kohen was not allowed to come into contact with the dead body. Because what does death signify? Death signifies the absolute absence of godliness. What is life? Life is the life of God breathing within you. When I am alive and I'm breathing and talking, why am I alive? Because there's God within me. The breath of God is within me. If God forbid a person dies, what does that mean? The godliness, the neshama, the soul, the spark of God within him that animated him and gave him life is no longer there. So death is the ultimate epitome of a void, of an absence of godliness, which is why a dead body gives us ritual impurity, because a dead body is a black hole of ungodliness. There's no holiness there. The Kohen, who is meant to be spiritually a conduit, a connector that brings me and you closer to God, cannot come into contact with the dead body, because the dead body is the absence of life, the absence of God. Hope that's clear. Nevertheless, right? That clear? I hope so. Nevertheless, there are times when life is not by the rules. There's times you have to make exceptions, right? Every rule is meant to be broken, and every rule has an exception. And there are times where even the Kohen, who is meant to be a step closer to God than the average Jew, and therefore able to help the average Jew spiritually connect to God, there are times that even that Kohen that's one step closer to God also has to come into contact with a dead body. God forbid his wife passes away. God forbid his child passes away. Even though this person is normally a Kohen who is removed from the physical world and is for sure removed from the absence of godliness, there are times when he has to make an exception. He has to violate his own holiness for the sake of his family. He violates his own holiness because of the wife who is so close to him. She is, as we said earlier tonight, closer than the rest of the family. Then you have, so before I go further, so explain what that means. Consider the Kohen normally cannot become ritually impure from the absence of the dead body, is because in its spiritual source, the level of a Kohen is representing within God the level of God that is not able to become ritually impure. A level of God that's higher than the physical world. Meaning there's dimensions of God that are in the physical world, and then there's dimensions of God that are beyond the physical world and are not able to become ritually impure. And so too, And so too with God. There's many levels of God that are his kindness, that are his emotion, that are his compassion, that are his hands, etc., all metaphors that are basically how God is engaged and involved with the world. But then there's a dimension by which God relates to the world, just like a Kohen, where he's not able to come into contact with the impurity and with the absence of godliness in this world. Now, from that level of God not able to come into contact to impurity comes, in the physical sense, the law that a Kohen is not allowed to become ritually impure. You understand? So on God's level, it's not possible for God, on this dimension of God's relationship with human beings, to become ritually impure. That translates to a level where it's not permissible for a Kohen to become ritually impure. However, there's times when the Kohen has to become ritually impure, meaning where God basically has to say that I'm vulnerable and I am allowing myself to become contaminated, to allow myself to be defiled, to be together with the Jews as they go into exile. There's a level of God where even though God is so holy that he's normally not able to become in contact with parts of the world that are a concealment of godliness, even that level of God is sometimes faced with the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, and that level of God says, I'm going to be involved in this burial. And I hope I'm being clear. So basically, just like in the physical realm, normally a Kohen represents a person who's a step closer to God. And therefore they have to say, as far as possible, removed from an absence of godliness, which is a dead body. Yet there are times that this Kohen, for his close family, is allowed to violate his own holdings for his family. So too with God. This level of God called the Kohen is a step higher than the regular levels of God that are engaged and interacting with the regular world, and therefore could be in contact with death, with a lack of holiness. This level of God is a level of God that cannot become in contact with unholiness. However, even this level of godliness that's normally so much greater, that's normally not contaminable, that level says, like a Kohen for his wife, says, this level of God says, for the Jewish people that I love so much like a sister, that I love them in such an unbelievable way, this level of God could also become contaminated and to become vulnerable and to become ritually defiled for the sake of the family that it loves. However, here, a Kohen Gadol can't do that. There is a level of a Kohen called a Kohen Gadol, which can never become ritually defiled. There is a level of God that can never become ritually defiled. There's a level of God that can never go with us into exile. But that is not the level of God that is engaged with the Jewish people. Even though God could have said that I will be to the Jewish people like a Kohen Gadol, I will be to them like a high priest and never, ever, ever comes into contact with impurity. I will not be that, says God. I will be like the Kohen described in the verses we read tonight. I will be like the Kohen that there are times that is willing and allowed to defile his own holiness in order to remain close to the family that he loves, to the family that's a part of him. I will not be, says God, like the Kohen Gadol that is always pure. I will be like the Kohen, the regular priest, that my relationship with the Jewish people will allow the Jewish people to pull me down into exile, to pull me down into Tuma, into ritual impurity. Why? And here's the key message and the takeaway and the message of tonight. Because God wants us to know that wherever we're holding, God is with us. It says the Jewish people went to exile, Galu Edom, when we were exiled into Edom, into Rome, to Shina Imahem, the Shina, the divine presence, went into exile with us. When God appears to Moses in the burning bush, God appears not in some beautiful flower bed, in some beautiful roses. He appears in a thorn bush. Why does God appear in a thorn bush? He could have picked a more comfortable bush, a more aesthetically pleasing bush. Because God wanted to send a message to Moses and to the Jewish people, and the Jews are suffering in Egypt in slavery, and I too am suffering with them. I'm sitting in a thorn bush. I'm not sitting in some throne room in some beautiful palace, aloof and disconnected from my people. I am with the Jews in their pain. I am with them in their tzara, in their problems, in their suffering, in their ritual impurity, in their disconnection from God. When they disconnect themselves from holiness and become involved in tumah, and they go off into the wrong things, in the wrong places, and disconnect themselves, God is still with us. And that is a secret Kabbalistic dimension, the Hasidic dimension. The Rebbe shares with us on this verse that that God is not like a Kohen Gadol. God is not on the highest level of purity. God is a Kohen. He's a step above. There's a level of God that's a step above that which is revealed in the world. But even that level of godliness is with us. It's controlled by us. And wherever we go, God goes with us. In whatever dirt we find ourselves in whatever problems we find ourselves in whatever schmutz, in whatever garbage we end up, God is with us there too. That is a spiritual dimension, the secret dimension of the verse. We discussed the pshat, the simple laws of a Kohen going into a hospital, into a museum, etc., a cemetery. We discussed the hint in the word close to him, that it has to be a wife that was married, not just a fiance. She has to be to him and not someone that was divorced. L'she'ero, because she's the one that brings him food and clothing, so she becomes closer to him than those who are naturally part of him. And finally, the message that God is like a Kohen who is allowed to become defiled for us, because wherever we go, God goes with us. Good night, my friends. May God bless us all with wherever we go, God is with us. So let's make sure we take him to good places.